How's it going, everybody? This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show, coming to you on this Wednesday night, week one of the NFL season in the books. The Jets and the Giants coming off disappointing losses, news and notes around the rest of the NFL after opening week, and we check in with the Yankees and the Mets chasing down playoff spots in the final couple weeks of the Major League Baseball regular season. Nick DeLuca joined by Will DeFusco, Kayla Wenzel, our producer. Will, I'm walking to Dealey Hall, getting prepared for doing the show tonight, and it just occurs to me, because you get scrolling through Twitter and seeing all of the chatter about what happened week one and then leading into week two, and this is a big matchup, and this team needs to do this. And I have come to the conclusion that this might be the prime spot in all sports, but in particular for the NFL, for overreactions. I am hearing so much about this team was supposed to be good and now they're no good anymore. And Aaron Rodgers, the MVP, is washed up or doesn't want to play football anymore because of one poor performance. And this team doesn't have what it takes in the major leagues to become a playoff team. And I'm just curious if you're seeing that, because that was my thought. I'm seeing so much stuff on Twitter, overreactions and knee-jerk. Can we relax a little bit tonight?
Yeah, I totally agree. I saw that about the Giants and Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones being kind of ridiculed for his week one performance, and them saying, a lot of people saying, is he the right quarterback for New York, and is he the answer for New York? I saw the same thing on the Saints-Packers game. Is Jameis Winston the new face of the franchise in New Orleans, and is Aaron Rodgers not it after being benched for Jordan Love late in the game? Even Patriots, Mac Jones, he had a good game week one, but are people taking it too far? Are they taking his solid statistics too far? Are they saying that he's the next Brady?
It's really interesting to me, and it's always a fun time to be able to recap all this stuff, and we'll get to a number of those things as mentioned, the Jets and the Giants, and the recapping of their week one performances. Not pretty, in particular, I would argue, for the Giants. The Jets, of course, coming away week one losers, but a better second half for a young team, and what is very clearly a rebuilding year. This is a very big year for the Giants, with those expectations sky high for Daniel Jones, their offense, Jason Garrett, and a defense that had been very good last year and not producing the same results against a team that I think a number of people would have expected them to handle in the Denver Broncos, but also the rest of the NFL and the Yankees and the Mets, and some college football with some of the happenings there. And we hope you'll stay with us here for the next 90 minutes. But it's just an interesting spot where you get a number of these overreactions, and you hear it a ton with the Giants in particular. And I think you nailed that, at least in talking about Daniel Jones. But the funny thing is, I'm not so sure I'm ready to call that an overreaction or say that is one that's out of place. I think something's got to be done for their offense, because it's strikingly similar to last year. This is a group that expected to be much better than they were. And it's not to say that certain teams will not regress, or certain teams will not perhaps be what they are 5 weeks from now, where they are right now. But it felt like, in watching the Giants go out week one, this is very similar to what we saw for most of last year. And I'm trying to figure out who to blame, because there's Daniel Jones on one side, there's Jason Garrett on the other, there's Joe Judge, and all that surrounds the Giants organization. But make no mistake about it, now they have created an environment where on a Thursday night, you're on the road in Washington. That's a big game. You don't want to fall to 0-2.
Yeah, that is a big game. And they put enough pieces around Daniel Jones to give him the opportunity to succeed. Kenny Galladay is a legit wide receiver one. Sterling Shepard had a great game last game. I think one of the problems is Saquon Barkley. He only had 26 yards on the ground. He wasn't looking as explosive as he was pre-ACL tear. And you need to get the ground game going, especially to keep the pressure off of Daniel Jones. In the past game, Von Miller had 2 sacks last game. And you're going up against a Washington team this week that has 4 first-round picks on that defensive line. If they couldn't hold Denver's defensive line out of the backfield, then I'm not sure if they can hold Washington's defensive line out.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you bring that up too, and I'll hold that for a second because I wanted to circle back to Saquon, and I thought that was very interesting that you mentioned that as well, because I think you're 100% right, did not look like that was the Saquon of old. There was a little bit lacking in that burst from him, and I think that's a huge aspect, but also with the additions that they've made on this offense, and this is where, to me, it's very head scratching to see the direction that the Giants are going offensively, whether it be the decision making for Daniel Jones, or I think more on a macro scale, it's about what Jason Garrett's doing. But Kadarius Toney, their first round pick wide receiver, not very much involved. A few touches early, didn't block up the sweep the right way, and he loses a few yards and doesn't really get involved for the rest of the game. They tried to feed him a little bit early, but didn't get him involved really in the second half. And Kenny Golladay, a guy who really wasn't targeted until garbage time. So just some interesting and perhaps curious is the best way to describe the offensive philosophy for the Giants at the moment. And that's something that you feel like needs to get corrected, and you don't want to overreact too much, but it's a familiar theme. This is not just, oh, well, things went well last year and it's just one game. This is now, all right, into next season. Let's see what Daniel Jones can do, continuing to progress with a better accommodation of complement of weapons around him. And it really just wasn't the case in week one against Denver. And that's a secondary that is well coached, has some talent, but you feel like the Giants should have had some success against.
Yeah, they should have had some success. The Broncos aren't considered a very good team this year. They're not expected to make the playoffs. And Jones, there's an interesting stat. Jones has fumbled more times than he's played in games. He has 30 fumbles. He's only played in 27 games. He has 22 interceptions, 36 touchdowns. He hasn't performed to the level of the draft pick that he was drafted at. And I think because he's not an elite quarterback, you need to establish the run game to get him more comfortable, to get more of a flow offensively. They only hit 7 points, not including garbage time. They ended up with 13. But when you can't run the ball, I think they had less than 70 yards rushing on the day in total. You can't really go anywhere. You can't open up the play action. You can't get the defensive lineman off of your quarterback. And Daniel Jones is not such an elite talent that he can overcome all of these woes on the offensive line and in the run game.
So a number of issues for Big Blue to try and clean up, and we'll get to that as the show goes along later in our Jets and Giants segment. Of course, the Jets losers 19-16 against the Carolina Panthers to open up their season, falling behind 16-0. A better second half. Zach Wilson looking rusty in the first half and just trying to figure out exactly what everything is coming off what was an excellent preseason. Now the bullets flying for real. Looked to be a little bit fast for him in the first half, not helped by some really difficult offensive line play for the Jets against a Panthers defensive line that I don't know is the greatest, but that is certainly something that Jets fans will have to pay attention to, just in terms of how that offensive line holds up, in particular with an injury to Mekhi Becton. He'll be out 4 to 6 weeks. It's a knee injury. But overall, into the second half, the Jets showing a pulse. And I think that's certainly an encouraging sign for Zach Wilson in week one. How much do you expect from your rookie quarterback, first time out, first 30 minutes, gets in, calm down, halftime adjustments with Mike LaFleur, and look much better in the second half?
I think Zach Wilson looked very good considering the situation that he was thrown into. Sacked 6 times. It's tough to do very well as a quarterback when you're sacked that much. Your left tackle going down, that's another big blow. I think he's feeling what Sam Darnold felt the last couple of years in New York. But he had a lot of promise. He had that rollout touchdown throw to Corey Davis in the second half. That was a nice throw. And then he had a throw on the to make it, I think, 19-16 towards the end of the fourth quarter to Corey Davis also. That was a really sharp throw. I think he's got a lot of promise. I think they need to definitely shore up the offensive line for him. But if they can fix their offensive line problems, I think they can be competitive. But next week's going to be a tough challenge for them, going up against a Patriots D-line that is better than that Carolina's D-line.
And that, I think, an overarching point of concern for the Jets and their offensive staff in particular, just because you don't want to throw your rookie quarterback in a spot where he's going to continue to get beat up. And I thought that that is probably the most positive aspect of this game for the Jets, is that Zach Wilson was able to overcome some of that adversity and some of the difficulties that come along with getting sacked 6 times. And of course, it also bears mentioning that being sacked 6 times doesn't necessarily mean that's all on the offensive line. With a rookie quarterback, sometimes the reads aren't there. Getting the ball out of the hands quickly is not there. And there is some shared blame in making sure that the protections are nailed down 100%. But when you are dealing with some of the pressure and the duress that he was under, in particular, when Carolina didn't necessarily have to blitz, and some of that pressure for Wilson to handle that as well as he did in particular, and not crumbling and rising to the moment in the second half, is certainly something that is encouraging. And now for the Jets trying to put things together, who were also fortunate on the defensive side, that, of course, a place where it is very much a work in progress for Robert Saleh and company on that defensive side of the football. Bailed out by a red zone turnover by Sam Darnold, but this was a defense that really looked like it's got a long way to go to be competitive, and may see Zach Wilson in a number of shootouts. And I don't know that the defense was expected to be a source of strength for the Jets. I think a number of people were anticipating that this was going to be a struggle for them, in particular in the secondary, which is unfortunate in today's NFL with how teams can throw it. But that was a disappointing performance for them. It was interesting to see how well Sam Darnold played, and he did play well, perhaps not as well as you might have hoped. Not to say it was a poor performance, but just with how bad the Jets secondary is, he looked much better than he had as a New York Jet. Not sure how much that has to do with a new supporting cast and a new team, as much as it is just the Jets defense is really in a difficult spot at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really expected the Jets to be competitive offensively or defensively this year. And I think, Sam Darnold had a really tough time his first couple of years in the league, and now he's with a team that has a much better supporting cast, a much better defense that can keep him on the field longer, a better O-line. That was the main problem for Darnold when he was on the Jets. The opponents were always getting to him in the backfield, always getting sacked. You can't play well when you've got pressure all over you. And I think Zach Wilson is currently in the same situation, but I think the Jets, with the new coaching staff, they can get Zach Wilson better help than they were able to get Darnold in his first 3 years.
I am inclined to agree with you on that. You certainly feel more comfortable about the organization that is behind Zach Wilson than what was with Sam Darnold, both in coaching staff and in front office. Of course, Joe Douglas there for the tail end of Sam Darnold, but he certainly was not building that team around Sam in the years that it really mattered. So interesting to see how that's going to pan out. And you certainly have to feel a little bit more confident in what they are going to run out there in terms of head coach, quarterback, and general manager, in such an important aspect of any organization and finding success in the NFL. Of course, we'll get to the Yankees and the Mets as well, the playoff pushes for both of them. The Yankees sitting 1 game ahead of Boston in the loss column for the second wild card, tied with Toronto after what has been a very rough stretch that continued into the weekend against the Mets in the Subway Series. We're able to take one. Francisco Lindor hitting the 3 home runs on Sunday Night Baseball, and what got a little bit chippy and eventually ended in a Mets victory. But the Yankees have moved on to Baltimore after the 1 makeup game against Minnesota, leading right now, 1 yesterday. Yankees trying to find a way with a schedule that is not terribly difficult at the moment to play some better baseball and give themselves a chance in October and not make this season a complete and utter failure by missing the playoffs. That, I think, would raise a lot of eyebrows. And they are going to have to find ways to continue to get the bats going. But the bats have fluctuated, which has been a surprise. It's been the pitching that has really been what the Yankees have relied on, and has not been there the last few games, and certainly into this rough stretch for them. And they're going to need that pitching to carry them as they go forward and try to make a playoff push, because time's running out, around 15 to 17 games remaining here.
Yeah, I think the only solid starter the Yankees have right now is Garrett Cole. and you're relying on a rotation that's not exactly solid, and you're going into the bullpen too early. So you're kind of wearing out the bullpen. They're hitting, it's hit or miss. They hit 5 home runs last night. Some nights they won't hit 5 home runs. They really need to clean up in the next couple series against easier opponents, Orioles, Indians, Rangers, because they finished their season with a Red Sox series, a Blue Jays series, and a Rays series. They need to win those games.
Yeah, it's going to be right down to the wire for the Yankees, and in particular, making sure that they take care of business against the teams that they need to handle, and those that are toward the bottom of the standings. You mentioned the Indians, you mentioned the Baltimore Orioles, who they are playing tonight, and then again tomorrow. And that's been a story for them. They have not taken advantage of the teams that they are supposed to beat. They're 10-7 against Baltimore this year, which is amazing when you look at Tampa Bay, who went 18-1 against the Orioles. And that's been something for them that has really been an indication of how well they've played over the last number of years. In 2019, they really handled their business, were very good against Baltimore. Of course, 2020, a bit of a wash, which is everything that went on. 2018, you remember the Yankees having to play the wild card game against the A's, the Red Sox eventually winning the World Series. They won that division, but the difference for the Red Sox versus the Yankees, again, was beating the lowly Baltimore Orioles. And it's amazing how it comes back to bite them. But they needing to take advantage of that weaker schedule before what is a really difficult final 9 games of the season for them. But I don't know that you'd want it or draw it up any other way. That's really an outstanding way to finish the season, because you're going to have the opportunity, if you want to be in the playoffs, if you're the New York Yankees, it's right there in front of you. Go out and beat the teams that are right there and you're competing with and vying with, and you're in. You control your own destiny. I think that's a positive.
Yeah, the AL East is very competitive this year. You got 4 teams that are very good. The Yankees have to beat out at least one of those teams, the Red Sox or the Blue Jays, to get a wild card spot. I saw an interesting stat that 15% of the Orioles wins come against the Yankees, and yeah. I think that's too much. You can't lose all those games to a team that only has 40-something wins this year. And like you said, those last 9 games of the season, those are going to be really exciting. That's a chance for you to really make a statement and get into the playoffs.
And on the other side of town, the Mets, coming off the Yankees series, trying to find it, still looking up at the wild card standings and also the division, trying to catch the Braves and hoping to put together some good baseball, following some momentum with that Yankees series, but still an uphill battle for them, trying to get healthy and continue to find the production from the pieces that they need to in that lineup.
Yeah, I think the Mets definitely have an uphill battle to get into the playoffs. They're behind, I think, 3 or 4 teams. Syndergaard, DeGrom, they're still working their way back from injury, and I think Syndergaard had COVID. So they're still working their way back from those various setbacks. So I think the Mets' playoff chances are much slimmer than the Yankees.
And doing battle with the St. Louis Cardinals tonight, the team that is in possession of the second wild card. They trail the Mets do 6-3 at the end of 6 at the moment. So we'll see if the Mets can stage a comeback both tonight and as they go forward, closing out the rest of the Major League Baseball regular season. And of course, we will wrap up with a little college football. Oregon beating Ohio State, that a big takeaway from this weekend, and just really the wide open nature of the college football landscape, with so many teams losing so much going into this season. When you think about Alabama losing Mac Jones and a number of first-round picks and a host of offensive weapons, and Clemson losing Trevor Lawrence and a number of weapons on their offense and defense for that matter. And you go up and down the list. Notre Dame graduates Ian Book and a number of their starters on the offense and losing some defensive pieces as well. Who am I missing from the playoff from last year? Ohio State, Justin Fields is gone as well. So there is not an established power with returning players. Now, Alabama is still right there in the thick of things. Georgia looking to be a formidable force after a win over Clemson in week 1. But just a wide open nature, certainly proved by Oregon going in to Ohio State and beating them at the Horseshoe, and just a lot of teams that can contend. This is what college football, in my opinion, is supposed to be. A lot of teams have an opportunity to compete for the college football playoff and the national championship, And it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion it's going to be Clemson and Alabama at the end of everything.
Yeah, I think that's good for the game. Last year, Alabama was just incredibly solid all around, and you had consensus number one pick on Clemson. This year, I think it's a lot more open to other teams like Oregon getting into the playoffs, beating teams that are always in every single year.
And of course, USC making headlines as well, firing Clay Helton, and that stint had been on thin ice for a while, and eventually he getting the boot, which has stirred up a number of rumors about any number of coaches, including Urban Meyer with the Jaguars. He refuted that this afternoon, as expected. At least one game in, you don't think he's going to jump ship yet. There was some reporting about James Franklin potentially being in position for that job. Not a ton to speculate about just because it is so far away with some of these coaches being even in the position to interview or to accept that job. And you figure that that is going to be a search that will move and continue for the next few months as USC finishes out its season after a disappointing start. And the loss last weekend ultimately dooming the USC tenure for Clay Helton. So we got to take a quick break. On the other side, we'll get to more of the Giants and the Jets. Zach Wilson's debut. Where do the Giants go from here? You're watching One-on-One nightly here on WFUV Sports. Back here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on a Wednesday night. Nick DeLuca, Will DeFusco here with you, and want to get to some more NFL talk, and in particular staying in the New York area with the Jets and the Giants. And we touched on it a little bit earlier, but such a frustrating start to the year for the Giants, and especially with the way that their offense performed, because this was a team that knew that the defense was going to be pretty solid, and it was in spots last Sunday, perhaps not to the degree that they were hoping for. And that is probably safe to say for, the entirety of the Giants' effort on Sunday. But an offense that I know a lot of people were hoping to see take the next step. And if this is the year for Daniel Jones to be solidified as a franchise quarterback, he's going to have to go out and prove it sooner rather than later. So you add weapons like Kyle Rudolph and add weapons like Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney to the cast of characters that they have at the moment. And of course, Saquon Barkley is coming back and all that stuff. But they're really not able to do much against Denver defense that is good. You don't want to take that away from them, but certainly you're looking for more of an encouraging performance from the Giants, who did not do a great job of moving the football at times throughout Sunday's loss. And it just really begs the question, where do they go from here? Because you're going to see another difficult defense this week on short rest playing the Washington football team. And this is a side that just it looks like they're not in rhythm. And that happens in week one at times, but it looks like they haven't been in sync for the last year in one game. And Jason Garrett, a guy I know who has come under a lot of fire with the way that things have gone for the Giants offensively in the last year plus, but just some curious play calls, play designs. What are you trying to achieve offensively? And I don't think that helps Daniel Jones, who did not look great at times as well. And it's just an odd fit to me, because they just don't seem to mesh very well. And that, of course, a problem, because we've seen it for a year plus now.
Yeah, I think continuity is a very underrated part of NFL success. And they didn't really have that this offseason. Kenny Golladay, Kyle Rudolph, two new additions, were both injured during the preseason. Evan Ingram is currently injured, and he won't be playing on Thursday Night Football. So you have a lot of weapons, but they haven't had a lot of playing time together. Saquon Barkley coming off a big injury as well. So I think you need to get all of them together to play for a stretch of time. I don't expect them to be better than the Washington football team or even the Cowboys, but I think in order to improve, you can't really add anybody at this point. You have to get continuity within your own roster. You have to get some more chemistry going between Daniel Jones and his wide receivers, the offensive line, get Saquon Barkley going. You just need to get some time together and get to know each other better.
So you're of the opinion of being patient and a wait-and-see approach and trying to get all the group together and grow, hopefully, over the next couple of weeks.
Yes, I think for now, I don't think you can panic after week one. I think week one's a little too early to panic, although Daniel Jones hasn't looked very good so far in his career. But I don't think you can't change the quarterback right now. You need to ride Daniel Jones out at least this season. So you need to pull everything together and see what you can do with this roster. And if you can have success with this roster, I think you should stick with it.
Well, I don't know that there are a ton of people who are clamoring for Mike Glennon to be coming into the game for the Giants at the moment. Now, I suppose that there are those who are few and far between who might be of the opinion that Mike Glennon is an improvement over Daniel Jones. I haven't met anybody there, so I'm going to assume that is not the majority of Giants fans. But for me, the most concerning part is where they live schematically, and that's just the thing that seems to be a bit off to me when I watch the Giants, and certainly was doing that on Sunday. It was just, it felt like Jason Garrett is not terribly understanding of the personnel that he has. And we'll see how they adjust this week. And I think this is going to be a point of emphasis, but something that you saw last year, and just in terms of getting the ball out quickly, it was not an adjustment that they really made very well with an offensive line that didn't play particularly well last season, and then to this year where their offensive line, at least in week one, save for a couple of plays by Nate Solder in which he is inexplicably blocking his teammate or really struggling against Von Miller, you feel like the Giants' offensive line, again, not facing Bradley Chubb, who did not play for Denver, but they held up pretty well. Andrew Thomas, according to Pro Football Focus, an 86 overall grade. I mean, that is something that the Giants have to be encouraged about with the play of their offensive line, perhaps not as much in the running game, but there was something that I saw on Twitter in perusing things and in looking at what certain people were saying about the Giants. And it mentioned that Daniel Jones has been much more effective when they call routes that when they call patterns that have two or more routes of 15 or more yards down the field. Now, that's not saying that Jones always is throwing to that player who is running 15 yards down the field, but when the Giants are able to create separation, to stretch the field vertically, that has opened things up for their offense. And Jones, I believe, was 6 of 6 for 150 odd yards in the touchdown when the Giants did that. And when they don't do that, he was certainly not of that caliber. So it just is a head scratcher. And not that you can always do the same thing as an offensive play caller, but to not really realize that, and also be in a spot where your first round wide receiver is not being targeted, and Kenny Golladay, a prize free agent acquisition, is not being targeted, and Saquon Barkley isn't effective. It just begs the question that some of it, I don't know how much it is Daniel Jones, and this is going to bleed into the overall evaluation of him. How do you even get an answer on Daniel Jones if Jason Garrett is not doing what he needs to be doing as a play caller? Or is it that maybe I'm crazy, Jason Garrett is doing what he needs to do, and Daniel Jones just isn't executing?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that's an interesting stat because they definitely have the players to run those routes. Kenny Golladay, they spent $70 million on him in the offseason. Kadarius Toney has the speed and separation ability. Evan Ingram can even get down the field. And when they have Saquon healthy, they have the ability to run those play calls. I think I saw on Twitter that a lot of people were describing their offense as boring and just a lot of short field throws. And I think it's a combination of both. I don't think Daniel Jones is quite developed yet to completely capitalize on what he has in offensive weapons. And I don't think Jason Garrett is the most creative play caller either.
Yeah, certainly interesting on him too. And one of the underrated aspects of him even being hired, of course, is that he was a head coach and in the game for 10 years. But when you don't call plays, it's certainly different. And just the mentality of, all right, I got to know how many timeouts there are. I got to manage the special teams. Or what are we doing on offense? I'm just telling my offensive coordinator we're going to run or we're going to throw, as opposed to actually making the play call. And that's certainly a difference. And I'd be curious what the level of patience is with Jason Garrett. And I'm certain that will be a question to Joe Judge at some point throughout the week, should these struggles continue. Daniel Jones, of course, going 22 of 37, 267, a touchdown and no picks. So not a horrendous day. QBR right around average at 50, but against a Denver side that was not painted with the most lofty expectations for this year. Teddy Bridgewater, a guy who is, I suppose, stuck in no man's land. Like, I don't really know what Denver wants to do with Teddy Bridgewater at the moment with Drew Lock, and perhaps they're just going to draft someone next year. And Vic Fangio, what does his status look like? Is he going to stick around? Probably not. And you get beat by your former head coach, Pat Shurmur, with a team that the expectations are certainly not high. And then on the defensive side of the football, a lot of meat left on the bone for them. That a unit that you have to imagine is something that the organization feels like is going to be a strength for them at some point throughout the season. And 27 points certainly gives them an opportunity to win. But against a Denver offense that I don't think is thought of too terribly highly, that not the best performance for them for a defense that they're expecting to carry them.
Yeah, their defense played solid at points, but they didn't get enough pressure on Teddy Bridgewater. Let me see. Logan Ryan had a nice play he stripped one of the Denver players on a fumble in the red zone. So they had flashes of good play, solid play, but as a whole unit, they didn't impress me that much.
Yeah, certainly a disappointing week one effort, and see if they can bounce back as they head to Washington to match up with the football team and seeing if they can get some of those defensive issues corrected against Taylor Heineke in this coming week, a guy who is perhaps not even at the caliber of Teddy Bridgewater. So potentially have the opportunity to take advantage of some of the Washington offensive shortcomings now about finding the way to get that offense rolling for the Giants against a much tougher opponent. The Broncos defense is good, but they're not Washington. Washington, a very difficult defense to have to contend with, especially up front. That should be an excellent test for a Giants offensive line that has had its share of questions heading into this year. Were pretty good in week one, but now against a much more difficult opponent, going to have to try and manage that same test going in to week two on Thursday night. Want to transition over to the Jets a little bit here. 19-14 Carolina, the winners in their week one matchup. And Zach Wilson, the story, of course, 20-37, 258, 2 touchdowns, did throw the pick, as you mentioned, was sacked 6 times in a difficult environment for him to try and thrive in. A QBR just under 29, which is interesting because you have to take into account what was a shaky first half. I mean, he wasn't good in the first half, and neither was the Jets offense. And I think it was very clear that Carolina said, we're going to go and we're going to try and stop the run. They didn't necessarily have to overcommit to stop the run because of the struggles on the Jets offensive line. And then it forces a rookie quarterback into a very difficult spot, whereas you're going to throw 37 times, 40 times in your NFL debut, and you're going to have to go and try and beat this NFL defense with not a ton of weaponry around you, and certainly not the caliber of protection that is ideal for a quarterback making his first start in the NFL. But have to have the feeling that it's at least a positive debut for Zach Wilson. There's a lot to build on for Zach Wilson and the Jets, and I think they're certainly in a different spot than the Giants, where the expectations aren't as high. You know, first-year head coach, rookie quarterback, the cycle starts over again, and maybe patience, a tired drum to beat for Jets fans about, losing season after losing season after 2-14, 3-13, 6-10, whatever the case might be. But you feel like there's at least a little hope for the Jets with a performance from Zach Wilson that was solid to start his NFL career.
I think I'm much more encouraged by his performance rather than versus Daniel Jones' performance. The offensive line really struggled for the Jets, and they gave up a lot of pressures, a lot of sacks. And they also didn't really have a run game, which for a rookie quarterback can be tough, because if you don't have a run game and you don't have an offensive line and you're standing back in the pocket throwing 40 times a game, you're going to get hit a lot and you're going to make a lot of mistakes. Zach Wilson threw an early pick, and that can be expected in his rookie debut, but he was very promising. He made some nice throws. He has a big arm. There was a pass down the middle for probably about 50 yards that was dropped by one of his receivers. He's a very talented quarterback, and I think once they can solve their offensive line problems, maybe get Mekhi Becton back from injury, hopefully get something going on the ground, I think this team can be respectable. I think they can compete for a few games. The expectations for the Jets aren't nearly as high as the Giants' expectations. And I think that'll help them. They won't feel overwhelmed and try to win more games than they can. And I think they have a shot at competing in the AFC.
And perhaps even more impressive for Wilson when you factor in, as you mentioned, the lack of a running game for the Jets. Tevin Coleman was their leading rusher, 9 carries for just 24 yards, along with 9. So when you factor that into just how ineffective the Jets were in figuring out a running game, and it really solely being on the shoulders of Zach Wilson to get things done, that adds to the impressiveness of the performance, of course, in particular in the second half, when the Jets were able to stage a comeback and be more competitive in that game. Of course, the other half of that is the revenge game narrative for Sam Darnold, who did some good things for Carolina, did not blow people away necessarily, but certainly one of his better performances if you stack it up with what he had been doing in his first few seasons with the New York Jets. 24 of 35, 279, a touchdown, and no interceptions, benefiting from a number of the new weapons that he has around him. not the least of which Christian McCaffrey, who had just under 100 yards rushing, 21 carries for 98 yards, getting Robbie Anderson involved, not a long touchdown pass. So Darnold really exposing some of the issues that are going to exist probably throughout the entire season for the Jets defense. But curious what your impression was of Sam Darnold in his first game away from the Jets, because for me, I really liked what I saw. It wasn't blow me away. It wasn't, blow off the page. This is really outstanding, a brand new quarterback. But it certainly illustrates to me what I feel like I have always thought about Sam Darnold, in that he is not an elite of the elite quarterback, but when you put the right supporting cast around him, this is a guy who can have a lot of success.
Yeah, situation matters, and Sam Darnold kind of proved that moving over to the Panthers. He has a much better situation around him. Good offensive weapons. Robbie Anderson, former teammate, caught a 57-yard touchdown. Christian McCaffrey, probably the best running back in football. A much better offensive line, a better defense. He had a much better overall situation than Zach Wilson did on the Jets, and he had a better game than Zach Wilson. I wouldn't say it was much better, but definitely the move from the Jets to a more solid organization like Carolina, I think that definitely benefited.
Yeah, I don't know how it couldn't, with what the mess was with their organization and Adam Gase and everything that accompanied that situation for Sam Darnold, who was certainly dealt a bad hand. And that doesn't mean that the Jets are beholden to hang on to him either, because sometimes it's just this organization can't afford to try and figure out whether Sam Darnold is the guy and then have to pay him in short order, compared to Zach Wilson giving them the timeline to just figure out whether he is indeed their guy and still have him for cheap for the next few years. That's just how the NFL is structured and built at the moment. And to try and negotiate and figure out where Sam Darnold stands with a new coaching staff and a new organization really for the Jets was just not something that was going to be feasible, but was certainly intrigued in seeing how well Sam Darnold would play. And I think he certainly passed the test. I just don't know that he proved anything. I think this is really, at least in my eyes, what I always felt about Sam Darnold. This is a guy who, when you put the right stuff around him, he can find success. But is he an elite of the elite quarterback? No, he's not somebody who's going to come in with nothing around him and be successful. If he was, the Jets would have been hanging on to him and certainly would have been better off over the last few years. And just wanted to wrap up with your thoughts on the Jets defense as well, because that to me is a unit that it might be in for a long season with some of the injuries that they saw on their defensive line in particular. Carl Lawson is one that sticks out above all the rest. And he was someone who had mentioned how much fun he was having being a New York Jet, but also just the impact pass rush that he was going to provide to potentially try and cover up some of the holes. CJ Mosley really struggled as a linebacker in his first game back in almost 2 years, in a secondary that's really young. The Jets feel like they're going to be giving up a lot of points this year.
I think they will be giving up a lot of points, but I think they have some promise on that defense. You mentioned the injuries. CJ Mosley, 2 years off from playing. Once they get back into it, I think they'll be a lot better. They're young and they're playing in a tough division offensively. The Bills have a great offense. The Dolphins have a solid offense, and the Patriots also have a solid offense. So I think they'll be giving up their fair share of points this year. But I don't think the Jets defense was expected to be great. I think they were expected to develop.
So the Jets defense looking to develop, looking for some more answers against a fellow rookie quarterback next week. They'll match up with the New England Patriots, Mac Jones and Zach Wilson getting an opportunity to do battle for the first time in the AFC East. Robert Saleh's first crack at Bill Belichick, and very intrigued to see how that goes on Sunday. We'll have to take a quick break as we wrap up the New York portion of our NFL talk, heading to the rest of the NFL. Some of the reactions from just overreaction week in the NFL, Aaron Rodgers, the New Orleans Saints, and much more. Stick with us here on One on One. Back here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Nick DeLuca, Will DeFusco here with you. Kayla Wenzel, our producer, here on a Wednesday night, getting into some more of the happenings around the rest of the NFL. Mentioned the Jets and the Giants both coming away losers in week one, but a number of headlines to get to, not the least of which the interesting, if that's the word you want to call it. I'll go even stronger than that. How about horrendous performance for the Green Bay Packers and the reigning MVP Aaron Rodgers, blown out 38-3 against the New Orleans Saints in a solid start to the New Orleans, starting career of Jameis Winston. When you look at Aaron Rodgers and all of what is going to be said about him this week, about he doesn't really care about playing football anymore, and everything that the offseason brought affecting his performance in week one not being on the same page. I think what was most interesting is that had he taken every snap on Sunday and spiked the ball, his quarterback rating would have been higher than it ended up being. And it was just a really difficult performance for him. And it's not something that you never see. It happens. He was 15-28 for 133, no touchdowns, and the 2 interceptions. It wasn't like the Packers won the line of scrimmage, certainly. I mean, New Orleans was able to get after Green Bay on the offensive line pretty well. But there's so much to be said about where the Packers stand. And I feel like there are a number of people who are unfairly writing the Packers off at the moment. And it's not to say that this performance wasn't concerning, but this is a team that's been in the NFC Championship game over the last couple of years. And to say that they're done because of a poor week one performance, I don't think sits right with me. I'm not sure how you feel about it, but I'm not saying that they look good. I'm not saying that things don't need to drastically improve, but to say that the Packers are done already
Yeah.
in terms of competing in the NFC seems a little bit early to me.
Yeah, it's definitely early. Aaron Rodgers, I mean, he won MVP last year, and he had a game like this last year as well against the Bucks. I think it was Week 6. He had 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. The Bucks blew him out, and that's exactly what happened here. This game might have been a little bit worse against a team that wasn't expected to be as good as the Bucks either. But every quarterback has a bad game like this, and I don't think you can write off the reigning MVP and an offense that's incredibly talented after one game. And it's not like the Saints have a bad defense either. They've got a very good defense: Marshawn Lattimore, Cameron Jordan. They've got a very well coached team. It was just an uncharacteristically bad game by Aaron Rodgers, and I expect to bounce back next week against the Lions, which is a great team to bounce back against.
What's interesting to me is I was looking at CBS had a graphic on Sunday about the leaders in sacks in the NFL over the last 4 years. And it was in the context of doing an interview with Myles Garrett ahead of Cleveland's matchup with Kansas City. We'll get to that later in the show, and what was an excellent performance for Cleveland to start controlling most of the football game. And then Patrick Mahomes, of course, reminding everybody how great that he is to lead Kansas City back once again from significantly behind. And they just are able to find ways to win like no other team in really the modern NFL with the way that they come from behind and win football games. But people forget how good New Orleans defensive line is, and Cam Jordan in particular. Like when I saw that he is a top 3 sack getter in the NFL over the last 4 years, I was like, wow, that is not somebody I necessarily think of. I mean, you think about how great that Cam Jordan is, and you know that he's a factor and somebody you have to identify on every snap. But when you see the production that he has been able to just consistently put forth as part of a New Orleans Saints defensive line that is a first-round pick in Marcus Davenport as well, that really was able to do some things. It's a tough matchup, in particular for Green Bay, who fell behind early and did not run the football very well. They carried the ball just 15 times for 43 yards. Aaron Jones, 5 carries, 9 yards. I mean, that was a running attack that was really shut down, and that's something that's going to make things difficult. I don't care how good your quarterback is, whether it be Aaron Rodgers or Zach Wilson. It's a spot where the quarterback's going to struggle.
Yeah, I mean, the New Orleans even gave Tom Brady a hard time last year with that defensive line. They really get after it. Cam Jordan's not as flashy as guys like Myles Garrett or the Bosa's or Aaron Donald, but he's a great player. The Saints overall, their defense overall is just suffocating, and it can get to the quarterback. And when your running back only runs for 9 yards, you're really going to struggle, especially because Aaron Jones is expected to do well on the ground. He averages over 5 yards a carry. And when you only have 9 yards on the ground, you can't really pass that well.
And then the other major takeaway from that game, of course, played in Jacksonville because of the hurricane considerations and some of the damage down there in New Orleans and throughout the state of Louisiana. But Jameis Winston making his first start as a New Orleans Saint, 14 of 20 for 148. So those numbers not necessarily jumping off the page, but 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, a quarterback rating just under 93, and a guy who was seemingly in total command of the offense. Of course, always the talk about, can Jameis Winston manage the turnovers? Can he take care of the football? Can he play within the structure of the offense? And I think that this was a perfect example of some of the growth and the maturation for Jameis Winston. This is a guy you can win with if Jameis Winston goes out and plays that way. Not necessarily throwing for 400 yards or lighting it up, but I'm going to take care of the football, going to take some deep shots, be accurate down the field. 5 touchdowns, no picks. That's as good as it gets in a debut.
Yeah, I think that stat line is indicative of a very well-executed game plan. He didn't need to throw it that many times to put his team in great position to score. Alvin Kamara had a great game on the ground, and he just played a lot better than he did in Tampa Bay, where the mindset was just gun it all the time. And he would throw for 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 picks. And he ended his last season in Tampa Bay with 30 touchdowns and 30 picks. And the Saints organization does not play that game. they don't play like that. They play a lot more conservatively than the Bucs do, and I think that might serve Jameis well. 5 touchdowns, 0 picks, a great stat line against a good team, and it's a big win for New Orleans.
Moving over to the AFC, Kansas City and Cleveland, a marquee matchup in Week 1, rematch of the AFC divisional round with Kansas City. Took down Cleveland with some injuries in the second half. Of course, Patrick Mahomes playing all of this game and Cleveland leading for most of this game. It was really an impressive start to the season for Cleveland, who amazingly have not won to open their season since 2004. So they have lost 17 straight Week 1 games dating back to 2004, which is just remarkable to me. And yet they seem to be on the upswing. And this, as talented a roster as any NFL team will field, and they won the only NFL team this past week to have 2 offensive linemen graded in the top 5 of all. I mean, their offensive line was really getting after it against Kansas City. It was really well done with the weapons. Of course, Odell Beckham Jr. didn't play, but still Jarvis Landry at the disposal, Austin Hooper, and Baker Mayfield with as potent a rushing attack as you will find in the NFL with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. And that was a group that was really able to get things going. But Kansas City on defense getting the stops that they needed to get, and Cleveland not quite able to salt the game away. A couple of really costly turnovers, a Nick Chubb fumble, which really swung the momentum and allowed Kansas City to get back into the football game and eventually take the lead. And then there's a lot of question about the quarterback, Baker Mayfield. And when the Browns are not in a situation where they're in front, able to run the football and forcing Baker Mayfield to pass, he wasn't able to bring Cleveland back in the last 2 drives, 3 and out in the interception. But you have to be encouraged if you're Cleveland with how well they were at least able to start the season, but also with the knowledge there's still a long way to go, because Kansas City, once again, proving that they're just such a formidable force. And Patrick Mahomes, you give him 1 turnover. It was 2. It was the drop punt and the Chubb fumble. But 2 mistakes for Cleveland, erasing all of the good things that they had built up through the first 3 quarters. And just, you give Kansas City an inch and they'll take a mile.
Yeah, I think really great teams capitalize on turnovers and opposing teams' mistakes. Kansas City kind of reminds me of the Patriots teams over the last decade or so. Good coaching, good quarterbacks, always capitalize on turnovers by the other teams, and they capitalize with touchdowns. Patrick Mahomes, best quarterback in the NFL. He'll make those throws, 75-yard touchdown to Tyreek Hill. And if you're the Browns, you need to keep the ball on the ground. You need to take as much time as you can away from Patrick Mahomes. You can't lose a lead like that if you're trying to beat Kansas City in the playoffs. But I think the Browns looked pretty good overall. Of course, the mistakes were, they have to be cleaned up, but they've got the best rushing attack in the NFL. They've got a really good offensive line. And I know some people might not trust Baker, but I think Baker is a solid quarterback. And I think Baker, with that team, which is incredibly talented, even getting Odell Beckham back, I think Baker is enough to get them to the Super Bowl.
And I'm trying to steer clear of the overreactions, but I find it very interesting that you just mentioned that, because I feel like that is what most people are hesitant about. Nobody, at least those within reason, are saying that Baker Mayfield can't play, or he is not somebody who can lead your franchise to pretty significant places. I mean, Kansas City on the ropes in the divisional round and a backup quarterback converting a 4th and 1. And who knows what happens if Cleveland gets the football back at midfield and are able to go in and score a touchdown. Did lead in the game on Sunday. But, is this a guy who, when push comes to shove, when you are trailing at times, can bring you back and find ways to win? Is this a guy who you can win a Super Bowl with? I think that's the question. It's not necessarily, is Baker Mayfield a quality NFL quarterback? I think the answer to that has been proven yes. I mean, this is a guy that you can win with, and with all the instability that has surrounded him in the Cleveland organization, finally paired with a head coach in Kevin Stefanski that seems to be steering this organization in the right direction. But is there a limitation to this? Is Baker Mayfield the guy that you can win a Super Bowl with? Because this, to me, is as talented a roster as there is, and yet they are not necessarily on that level with a Kansas City at the moment, or a Tampa Bay at the moment because it really seems to be only one place you can look, and it's the quarterback position.
Yeah, I think Baker, he's really only had one opportunity to show if he is capable of winning big games, and that was last year. And he didn't come through. He went 3-and-out twice, and then in this game he also went 3-and-out through the interception. But I think this team is just so talented, and I think Baker is good enough to the point where they could win if they are able to clean up their mistakes, not turn the ball over. And maybe their defense can step up a little bit at the very end against elite quarterbacks like Mahomes, Josh Allen. They're going to need to step up a little bit and not allow huge plays like that one to Tyreek Hill. But I think this team is definitely talented enough, and I think Baker Mayfield has it in him to get them to the Super Bowl, maybe even win a Super Bowl. But everything has to go right for this team for that to happen.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting spot that they find themselves in just because of how good this team is from a roster construction. I mean, just you look at them on the edges and in the secondary as well with some of the pieces that they have there. But just to think about, you've got Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney as two of your starting defensive ends. I mean, that's a really great roster construction. And Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb are their two better running backs in the NFL, and an offensive line that is just as good as it gets, if not the best unit. I would argue that it is. I mean, that's how good Cleveland's offensive line has been. So now it's about Baker trying to find that rhythm and find that ability to take the next step. And I don't know if he's quite there. It certainly didn't look that way on Sunday to take them to the next step and allow them to compete for a Super Bowl. And is he going to be a guy that's going to hold them back? I would hazard to say yes. I mean, it's a tough situation because it's not a cause to get rid of this guy. I don't know that there's a better option out there, but when you have to compete against a Tampa Bay or a Kansas City or a Bills team or a Steelers team, or, you know, the way things are going to shake out, even Baltimore, although they're decimated by injury, interested to see where Baker Mayfield's going to be able to stack up, because from a roster perspective, this is as talented team as there is in the NFL, and only time will tell if they're going to end up playing that way for the rest of the season. And they've got a pretty favorable schedule, so you'd have to imagine that they're going to find some success throughout the rest of the year. A number of headlines and a number of interesting games. The opener, Tampa Bay squeaking one out against Dallas, did not inspire a ton of confidence. Houston beating Jacksonville and Urban Meyer's debut in a game that was just really not terribly well played on either side. But Houston, who nobody thinks is going to be any good, is 1-0 at the moment. Arizona comes in and blows the doors off of Tennessee. A lot of speculation and a lot of talk about Kyler Murray and potentially this being a breakout year for him. Certainly some MVP chatter, and we have to put this in context and remember that Tennessee's defense is a mess. They really are not a very good defense. I saw a tweet that I thought was really funny that said Kyler Murray is making Tennessee's defense look like it's a high school defense. And somebody said, maybe it's just a high school defense. I mean, that is what you are working with Tennessee. But pumping the brakes with that disclaimer in there, Kyler Murray looked really good on Sunday.
He did look very good. 5 touchdowns. I mean, Tennessee's defense is not very good, but 5 touchdowns, it's hard to top that. I mean, you got weapons on that team. Deandre Hopkins had 2 touchdowns. Christian Kirk had 2 touchdowns.
And what a catch on the back of the end zone for DeAndre Hopkins. That's as good a catch as you'll see.
Yeah, and even Christian Kirk's touchdown catch was nice too. It was kind of a back shoulder grab. And of course, he had a touchdown with his legs. That's to be expected as well. They got to keep him healthy because last year when he went down, I think he had an AC joint sprain or something like that. When he was injured, their offense suffered because when you eliminate his rushing aspect of his game, you eliminate an even more explosive element of your offense. So you got to keep him healthy. Got to keep the receivers healthy, and their defense looked good against the Tennessee offense that was supposed to be good. Chandler Jones had 5 sacks against Ryan Tannehill. And I mean, if you're able to stop A.J. Brown, Julio Jones, and Derrick Henry, you're doing something right.
Yeah, I mean, you really like what you saw out of Arizona's defense too, because they really brought it with the pass rush, and Chandler Jones 5 sacks. Of course, J.J. Watt there now to supplement on the other side. And the question for them, aside from Kyler Murray's health, because you feel like if he's healthy, he's going to be a really big factor, and this is going to be an offense that's going to be able to find success and take off. Now, what does it look like on their defensive side of the football? And certainly so far so good in stopping the run, and an offense that I think a lot of people think highly of with the Tennessee Titans, with the weapons that they have there. I saw a few tweets that said they were missing Arthur Smith a little bit, who left to be the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons as well. So just, the week one, trying to sift through everything. And Arthur Smith, of course, losing to the Philadelphia Eagles 32-6, and Nick Sirianni's debut as the head coach of Philadelphia. Cincinnati winning over the Minnesota Vikings in overtime, the game-winning field goal in there. And Seattle, Russell Wilson off to a great start, and just so many things. Pittsburgh coming in and surprising Buffalo with a big win over the Bills. In that sense, a defense that really was strong in the second half in particular, and a Bills offense that didn't get into much of a rhythm, and Pittsburgh was able to find a ton of success on the defensive line. And I know that you were watching with an interested eye New England and Miami, and as we got into the Jets and the Bills struggles week one, the Miami Dolphins and the Bills will play here in week two. But just overarching impressions of the AFC East, and you get Mac Jones's debut, all eyes on Tua Tagovailoa, and figuring out, is he going to be the guy for the Dolphins moving forward? A ton of speculation. And again, is it possible that Miami would move off of Tua for any number of options? And is this going to be a guy who can lead them, into the future with the weapons that they've got? And Tua did the job, wasn't spectacular. Mac Jones looked like he's a guy who New England can build around. This early, but it's week one.
Yeah, I think Mac Jones is definitely a guy New England can build around. He had a completion percentage close to 75%. He was very accurate. He had one mishap in the first quarter where he threw it backwards, kind of uncharacteristically, but he cleaned it up. He was very accurate. He had a strong rapport with Nelson Aguilar. I think Tua did solid as well. He had a good game. They got the win. This division is going to be very, very talented for a long time. They got 4 quarterbacks, age 25 or younger, that are all high draft picks. They got a lot of solid rosters. Of course, the Jets are a little bit behind, but the Dolphins, the Patriots, the Bills, they're all very talented teams. They have young quarterbacks who have the potential to be talented as well. I think this division is going to be among the most competitive, as well as the NFC West, for a very long time.
And Tua 16 of 27, 202, the touchdown, the interception, was sacked a couple of times, doing enough for Miami to win, but not inspiring a ton of confidence. See if he can turn things around into week two against the Bills defense that was solid against Pittsburgh, really their offense that let them down in week one. And of course, Mac Jones, 29 of 39, 281, the touchdown, no interceptions, was sacked, but a solid debut for New England's new signal caller and his first taste of regular season NFL action. We'll have to take a quick break as we wrap up our talk on the NFL. Stay with us because we're going to get to some Major League Baseball. The Yankees and the Mets push for the playoffs here on WFUV. Back here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on a Wednesday night. Nick DeLuca, Will DeFusco, Kayla Wenzel, our producer here. Thanks for taking some time on a Wednesday night to hang with us here on Twitter. And we'll get into some baseball and the Yankees. As you know, I have been anxiously watching and updating and trying to figure out whether the Yankees are going to be a major disappointment yet again in potentially losing to Baltimore in what is the tightest of tight American League wildcard races. Brett Gardner coming through with a bloop 2 RBI single to give the Yankees the lead 4-3 in the ninth, and we'll update that as we go along. But the Yankees playing a number of close games. It's just who they've been this year, and it just – you feel like, again, with the Baltimore Orioles, there's not a ton of separation, and a team you feel like the Yankees should be handling, and yet they're in a close game again, but can they find a way to win? They're 3 outs away from doing that.
Yeah, the Yankees, they should be winning more against a team like the Orioles, who only have 40-something wins on the season. I think they're only 10-7 against the Orioles this season, and that's not really acceptable for a team with the amount of talent the Yankees have, the amount of the salary that they're spending on their players. Article on the New York Post. I mean, they're making nothing easy. Not even a win over the Orioles with Garrett Cole on the mound has been easy for them, and they're in a very close race. Them, the Red Sox, the Blue Jays, they're all within like half a game of each other. And they need to win against the Orioles and against other weaker teams coming up in their schedule before they play some tough series against the Rays, the Red Sox, and the Blue Jays.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing to me about the Yankees, and just how do you get a read on a team that has been so incredibly inconsistent? And it can work both ways, because when you look at how they are playing, you can say that there is no way that they will be able to string together enough consistent production throughout potentially winning a wild card game to the divisional playoff, to the American League Championship Series, to the World Series, to ever sniff being a team that is in contention there. But also, you feel like they are one red hot stretch away of that 13 in a row Yankee team that we saw throughout the end of August, of being right there and as good a team in the American League as exists. And it's such a difficult team to get a read on, and just which team is going to show up. And you feel like you're right. Nothing is easy against even Baltimore. You got Garrett Cole on the mound, or a team that really is historically bad and still needing that bloop to fall for you in the ninth inning to take the lead and avoid another loss that would really be soul crushing. But at the same time, you feel like you have to give them a ton of credit because of all the losses that they have endured throughout the year. And, this is the worst loss of the year. No, this is the worst loss of the year. This is soul crushing, bone crushing, whatever adjective or descriptor you want to use to try and figure out and disseminate where the Yankees are with disappointment after disappointment. They have been able to overcome it. They've been able to persevere and get off the mat. And now you feel like they're at least in a spot where if things go right, they can compete. But about finding that consistency for them, and I'm just not sure I'm there with how consistent they play. It's one of those things where you have a hard time believing that they're going to be able to string all that together. I know it's possible. You got the two extremes, but to see them really get hot with the way they've been playing, I don't know that I believe as of yet.
Yeah, you talked about their 13-game winning streak, and their 13-game winning streak was followed by dropping 12 of their next 15 games. And I mean, they've had a lot of bad losses, but they've also had a lot of great wins, and they've put themselves in a position where they can easily make a wild card if they play well. And they certainly have the talent to play well. They have so much hitting. Their pitching may be a little weaker, but I mean, they have a Cy Young contender at the very least in Garrett Cole, and they have many, many batters who can hit the ball out of the park. And they have enough talent to win. It's just a matter of consistently playing good baseball.
And the Yankees just going final with the moment, 4-3 winners over the Orioles to keep pace in the American League wildcard chase, so they will at least remain having a share of the second wild card. And depending on, well, they would lose the tiebreaker to the Blue Jays at the moment, who hold the first one, but tied in terms of record. And Boston one back in the loss column, and they're competing. And a lot of credit to them. I mean, as frustrating as it's been at times, they've been able to find ways to win and certainly keep pace. And one of the other things that I think is something important not to lose sight of is the difficulty that exists within the American League and the division. I mean, this is a difficult division to exist in, and the Yankees, again, by no means are meeting their expectations, but also to put it in context, they are 20 games over 500 and still fighting for their playoff lives in potential territory where they might not make the playoffs if they are not able to capitalize on some easy scheduling and finish strong in the regular season. Whereas if you look at where they might be if they were in the NL, for example, and of course that's not how it works, but St. Louis in sole possession of the second wild card, they're 6 games over 500. So just to put it in perspective, this is a difficult year for them. And look, no one's shedding tears for the Yankees, who have such a robust payroll and all the resources that are at their disposal, but just important to put the environment in perspective that they are in a more challenging landscape in the American League.
Yeah, the AL East is a very competitive division. I mean, the Rays with a payroll of only 30 million, they're a 90-win team. The Blue Jays and the Red Sox, I didn't think the Red Sox were going to be this good this year, but they've put together a very good season. The Blue Jays are solid. The Yankees are playing in a very tough division comparative to all of the other divisions. I mean, in the AL Central, the Indians are in second place with 70 wins, and the White Sox are in first with 83 wins, which is just about what the Yankees have as well. So they've got an uphill battle, but I think they have the talent to do it.
Yeah, you certainly have to feel that way. And now it's about for them potentially getting healthy too. And the status of a number of their pitchers in Luis Severino, perhaps Domingo Germán, being someone who can come back and be a factor, because you feel like this is a bullpen that is just extremely taxed. And they're able to get the victory tonight. Wandy Peralta doing enough, and Aroldis Chapman nailing down the save. But a guy like Chad Green, who has been up and down at times, and perhaps it's more about just the overworking for him. I mean, he has been used a lot throughout the course of the season by Aaron Boone as a guy who's just been there every day and has been healthy, and just another option that the Yankees have had to go to, and in particular because of some of the injuries and struggles for Aroldis Chapman in the case of Chad Green. But to see them get healthy and to see if those few arms in their pen are able to get them results, I think is a major factor for them down the line. Time running out, can Luis Severino get healthy? Can Domingo Germán come back to potentially add something to their bullpen that is really running on fumes at the moment?
Yeah, Severino coming back would be big. I know at the beginning of the season, a lot of fans were wondering why they let Masahiro Tanaka go so easily, because it's been revealed that the Yankees starting lineup is thin behind an ace in Garrett Cole. And so if somebody like Severino were to come back, were to be able to put together some wins, some good games, I think that could really help the Yankees.
Yeah, and I think that's perhaps really, as much as the battle is to be won on the field, it's also really an interesting battle off the field for them. And that might be perhaps more important, just how healthy can this team get, it perhaps determining their fate and destiny going forward, because it might be less about can the guys who are here really do it. I don't know if they've proved one way or the other, but it's trending toward, I don't know, in particular in the pitching staff department. But if they're able to get a number of reinforcements, you have to feel at least a little bit better about where they are than where they sit at the moment. But of course, all smiles in the Yankees dugout and clubhouse, at least at the moment, being able to find the victory against Baltimore and keep pace tied in the wild card chase. And now the eyes, of course, on the postseason and figuring all that out, and hopefully for them getting healthy and getting those contributions. And what I think is being lost a little bit in this season, which has been so turbulent and so difficult for the Yankees, is how good some of their top level players have been. And there's a lot of reason for negativity and a lot of reason to point out some of the shortcomings of a guy like Gleyber Torres or Gio Urshela, who has not been right since coming back and getting healthy. And, Brett Gardner, for example, who comes through with a massive hit tonight. or Luke Voigt, who has been in and out of the lineup, or an Aaron Hicks, who has missed most of the year. But when you look at the success that they have gotten from a guy like Aaron Judge, and I don't know that you can overstate what he has meant to this Yankees lineup and this clubhouse and everything with what he has done on a day-to-day basis. He has had just an outstanding season. And I don't know if people are really appreciating that to the point that they need to, because I don't know where the Yankees are without Aaron Judge. I think Giancarlo Stanton, to that lesser degree, is in that category as well. I mean, these two guys are in the middle of the Yankees order. These are the guys the Yankees are paying and looking at to produce, and they have done that this year, which has to be the most encouraging thing.
Yeah, Judge has played very well. I know there were, for some reason, some trade rumors about moving off Aaron Judge in the middle of the season, but he's got over 30 home runs, close to 90 RBIs. He's batting close to 280. He's had a great season. Giancarlo Stanton, for what it's worth, has had a pretty good season as well. He's got over 20 home runs. Even Gary Sanchez has over 20 home runs, although his batting average is very low. And of course, you can't forget about Garrett Cole, who's had a fantastic season for the Yankees on the mound.
Yeah, despite all the sticky stuff, commentary, and a really difficult start for him the next time out after all of that stuff went down. But he has had a Cy Young caliber season and has really been the driving force. It's been the Aaron Judges and the Stantons of the world, and even Sanchez to a lesser degree. And I know he is always a hot topic on any airwaves about how a number of people feel about Gary Sanchez. And yes, there are those defensive situations where you're scratching your head and saying, what is going on? But he has also been one of the better hitting catchers in all Major League Baseball, despite where he has been down just a bit this year. I mean, catchers don't hit, and Sanchez has provided that out of the catcher spot. But, where would this pitching staff be without a Garrett Cole? And you mentioned that you don't really feel a ton comfortable with the Yankees rotation in back of Cole, and I don't think there's a ton of reason to blame you. That they have been reliable throughout most of the year. Can Jamison Tyone, another guy who has been perhaps their most reliable option, at least in the second half of the season outside of Cole, can he get healthy too, also on the IL? But I don't know if Cole is being given enough credit as well for how well the Yankees have been able to play at times, the 13-game winning streak, whatever it is, because this is a team that does not win when they don't pitch well, and Garrett Cole has been at the forefront of that.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jamison Taillon, and Corey Kluber has also not done as well, former Cy Young winner, as well as hoped. And Jordan Montgomery's been solid, but there isn't really star power behind Garrett Cole like there is in that batting lineup. Garrett Cole is currently the favorite to win the Cy Young, so I think he deserves as much credit as Aaron Judge or Giancarlo Stanton right now.
Yeah, and there's still a lot of work to be done, and you want to pat the Yankees on the back, but certainly scrapping and clawing for a second wild card spot, not exactly what the expectation was coming into this season. Now, how do they navigate that going forward? Want to wrap up here. We got about 7 minutes. Thanks for sticking with us here on a Wednesday night here on Twitter. Wednesday night one-on-one nightly here on the airwaves, WFUV Sports. The Mets, and coming off of what was a victory in the series against the Yankees, they take 2 out of 3 with all the chippiness on Sunday night. They finally get that signature and memorable performance from Francisco Lindor, who hits 3 home runs, and there's so much talk, and Lindor backs it up with the 3 homers and leads the Mets to a win, gets the curtain call, whatever it is. But the Mets have struggled since that point, and they go on and are playing St. Louis in what is a massive matchup, because St. Louis, the holder of the second wild card at the moment. How realistic is the second wild card for the Mets right now? Not terrible, but with the way that a number of teams in front of them, San Diego has fallen off the map, and Cincinnati has struggled as well. St. Louis is certainly in that conversation as a second wild card. The Mets are firmly in the wild card conversation, and then drop two of the first 3 in that series. They lose 7-0 and 7-6 last night, and now in the bottom of the 8th inning, trailing by 7, it's 11-4 against St. Louis. And after all the success that they had against the Yankees, the struggles continuing as they moved on to the next series, and that's certainly not a sign for optimism for the Mets, who are really on their playoff fighting for their playoff lives at the moment.
Yeah, well, that's not a promising sign. The game tonight, they're 3, 4 games back of the Cardinals, and they need those games. The second wild card, the first wild card's taken by either the Dodgers or the Giants. That's not even close. But I think the Mets have a much tougher battle for the second wild card than the Yankees do, or for a wild card game. Um, it's also a matter of getting healthy for the Mets. DeGrom and Syndergaard are still not 100%, and they're not playing right now, and they need to get those two back if they want to seriously consider getting to that second wild card spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think health is going to be a huge factor in all of this for the Yankees, for the Mets, just for really everybody at this stage of the game and trying to navigate the end of the season and when arms are not fresh and a guy who can make the impact that Jacob deGrom can. I just don't know that there is time for him to build his way back up and what that might look like. But he is certainly a piece that is sorely missed, and as one of, if not the top pitcher in baseball, an arm that the Mets certainly could use at the moment. But it's interesting because you feel like, and who you're playing has a lot to do with it too. But the Yankees have to endure that really difficult loss. Lindor comes and snatches the win away from the Yankees, potentially taking 2 out of 3 against a Mets team that has been up and down and an opponent that they might be able to take advantage of. And then in the subsequent series, of course, the Yankees playing Minnesota, who's been basement of the AL Central, and then, of course, the lowly Baltimore Orioles. But they, after having another gut-wrenching loss, have been able to respond. And it's the Mets who are struggling after getting that big boost of energy. They find that win and then flat on their face in a series that they really needed to have a better showing against St. Louis.
Yeah, well, I think the reason why the Yankees were able to rebound and the Mets might have had a harder time is because the Yankees just have so much talent, and I don't think the Mets have that talent, especially offensively. The Mets have pitching talent, but they're not healthy right now. And when you have talent, you can overcome adversity a lot easier. You can pick up a lot of games that you might not be favored in easier than you would if you didn't have a lot of talent. And so I think that's what the Mets' problem is right now. And I think the only way to get into the playoff spot is to reclaim some of their pitching talent.
I'm fascinated to see where the Mets go from here. If they're not a team, especially in this landscape in the National League, mentioned how difficult it was in the American League, in the uphill battle for the Yankees, just because of everything that surrounds them in the landscape of the American League, and the Rays being a team that really has had a ton of success, and the Blue Jays and the Red Sox. And it's been the Yankees undoing as well. They have not played well at times, and that is certainly a factor in all of this. But having to compete in an environment where they are very much not guaranteed a wild card spot with where they are positioned in the American League. And you mentioned right there with the White Sox, who have run away with the American League Central. And I think it's the same in the National League. Just when you pay attention to the Cardinals being just 6 games over 500, the Mets are 2 games under. This a spot where I don't know that the playoffs were a necessity for the Mets this year. It's possible they would have been okay with not making it, but not in this environment. Not when the bare minimum of making the playoffs is being 6 games over 500. They're 2 under right now, about to be 3. And this a spot where they're really they're underachieving. That's the reality of the situation. This is a Mets team that is underachieving, and where do you go from here?
Yeah, I don't think the Mets may not have had playoff hopes this year, but they definitely expected to be over 500. And I think being 3 games under 500 with only 15 or so games to go, I think that's a little disappointing for the Mets with the amount of talent they have.
Yeah, it's certainly a difficult spot for them to be in, and we'll monitor that as the playoff chase heats up, and you'll see if they're able to finally get things done and potentially make some headway. But to make up 5.5 games in the division and 3 games even in the wild card is certainly a tall task for the Mets going forward into the final couple of weeks of the Major League Baseball regular season, and see if they can do it. Because if they are not able to, you would have to imagine, if there won't be already, a number of changes with the way their front office is going to be constructed, and perhaps Luis Rojas, who has not drawn the favor of a number of Mets fans. And there could be the Mets could be in for an offseason of a number of changes, should things stay the same at the moment. That is just about going to wrap it up for us here on One Nightly. If you missed any of today's segments, today's show will be available on demand on the WFUV Sports YouTube channel, on Twitter as well. Sports Director of WFUV, Bobby Chaffardini. The producer of today's show has been Kayla Wenzel. For Will DeFusco, I'm Nick DeLuca. Thanks for hanging out with us on a Wednesday night. One-on-One, a production of WFUV Sports.